This church leader tool is pretty short, but I think it's one that if you spend some time thinking and wrestling with it, it will really change how you lead and how you express your leadership to others. I'm calling it 4 Vital Why Questions. And let me start with the why piece. There's a wonderful TED Talk, and I've actually recommended it to others, by Simon Sinek, in which he explores the importance of why. If you can describe for yourself in your own sense of leadership or for your organization why it is that you do what you do, Sinek makes the argument that your organization will be much more successful and much more focused because you clearly have the why and express that. And I think this applies excellently as a church leader. We need to be able to describe the why of church leadership. And when we can do that, it focuses our own leadership. And when we can express that to others, it makes our church leadership much more powerful and convincing. And the best place I know to find some questions that wrestle with this why are in an excellent book called Leading Beyond the Walls, Developing Congregations with a Heart for the Unchurched by Adam Hamilton. Hamilton's book, in the introduction, offers 3 why questions and one with an implied why question, that if you can answer them in a concrete way for yourself and express them to others, it will change your leadership. I'll just tell you that when I was reading this book, recommended by my bishop, Bill Gohl, I read these questions and I thought, that's the value of the book right there. Anything else I read, and it is an excellent book, is just gravy on top of that, because the 4 questions were just excellent in framing church leadership. So those 4 questions, the first of those 4 why questions is, why do people need Christ? Why do people need Jesus? If we can't answer that, if somebody were to ask us, well, why would I need Jesus? If we can't answer that in a concrete, specific way, then our church leadership will be empty. We need to be able to clearly define that. And what I would actually suggest is to spend a little bit of time with these questions. If you're a journaler, or if you like talking to yourself, or however you would go about it, really spend some time with this question. Have this clear in your own mind. So again, if somebody were to ask you, you could say, well, this is why people need Jesus, need Christ. And then the second question flows from that, and that is, why do people need the church? And that, of course, is connected with the first question. In my mind, that would have to flow from why people need Jesus and then why do they need the church. But we would need to answer that in a very specific way. In fact, if you can't answer that, I sometimes joke, well, you could just close the church doors. I mean, you could just get rid of the property. If you can't clearly define why it is that people would need a church, then your church leadership will lack focus. So again, spend some time with that specific question. And then the third flows from the first 2, and that's, why do people need your church? Why do people need a particular church? Again, if you can't answer that for your church, then your leadership will lack focus and power, and we need to be able to express this. Now, this third one, perhaps you might not like the answers that you would have, but then you could start to focus and say, well, we're not having some great answers on this, but let's be able to name in a year's time what we would be able to like to say, and then focus our leadership so that in that year's time we could say, this is why people need our church. So those are 3 key why questions that when we have them, it just empowers our leadership. The 4th question from Adam Hamilton's book is not a why question, but it is, to whom does the church belong? And that, of course, is even somewhat of a rhetorical question. We should be able to say, well, the church belongs to Jesus. The church belongs to God. We do what God wants us to do in this particular church. I mentioned before, I think there's a why question. If we kind of know what the answer should be, it's Jesus' church, then the why question is, why is that not true? If it's the pastor's church or the church council or some key leaders or the biggest giver, then the implied question is, well, why is that? Because it should be Jesus' church. In fact, I was working with some church leaders, and one person related a conversation they had with a friend of theirs who basically said, "This doesn't feel like my church anymore." And I said to them, you need to respond to them, and you need to do that in a kind way. But essentially, the answer is, it never was your church. It never was. It was Jesus' church, and we try and do what Jesus wants us to do. So those are the 4 why questions, and I hope that you spend a little bit of time with them. It might be a very valuable exercise to work through these questions with your church leaders so that everybody can answer them, even coordinate them and combine them, because they'll be better as a church leadership group than anybody individually, and then start to live them out and express them in clear ways in your particular context. Well, again, I hope that this church leader tool has given you some powerful why questions. And if it has been helpful, I would ask you to pass it on to somebody else and have them wrestle with these 4 vital why questions. Take care and God bless.